I just want to double check, Mr. Perez-Verdia, are you on the phone?
Yes, I'm here.
Great, thank you. We ready? All right. I'd like to call this continued meeting of the Anchorage Assembly to order. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Allard?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Ms. LaFrance?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Here.
Ms. Zolotel?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Next, we have the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Weddleton?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next, we have the Land Acknowledgement. I'll be reading that tonight. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement recognizing the indigenous people of a place. It is a public gesture of appreciation for the past and present indigenous stewardship of the lands that we now occupy. It is an actionable statement that marks our collective movement towards decolonization and equity. The Anchorage Assembly would like to acknowledge that we gather today on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Athabascans. For thousands of years, the Dena'ina have been and continue to be the stewards of this land. It is with gratefulness and respect that we recognize the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspectives of the Upper Cook Inlet Dena'ina. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and move on with our regular business. So we're just going to be going in order of the agenda, starting with 14A. The only items that we have completed are 14D and 15D, but otherwise all the other items remain to be done. So with that, we now have before us item 14A, ordinance number AO 2021-31, an ordinance authorizing the disposal by perpetual non-exclusive electrical easement to Chugach Electric Association, Inc. on portions of 7 Heritage Land Bank parcels. John.
Waive reading.
Thank you. Public testimony is now open on this item. No one is on the phone list. Would anyone in person like to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony is closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, members may proceed to vote.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes.
That item is approved 10-0. Next, we have item 14B, resolution number AR 2021-84, resolution of the Municipality of Anchorage appropriating and adopting the 2020 Housing and Community Development Annual Action Plan.
Sorry. Waive reading. Sorry.
Thank you. Public testimony is now open on this item. We don't have anyone on the phone list. Would anyone else like to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony is closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just a reminder that next week at the Committee on Housing and Homelessness, we'll have a discussion about these programs through the and CDBG funds, emergency solutions grants and community development block grants, along with those programs that are proposed to be funded through the CARES Act extensions. So we're going to get that overall picture, but these programs here they fit in that picture. We've had the opportunity to talk with the health department, and I'd urge your support because this is really important work that's going to support a lot of the other work we're doing through other funding sources. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, members may proceed to vote.
Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Yes.
That item is approved 10-0. Next, we have item 14C, ordinance number AO 2021-32, an ordinance amending Anchorage Municipal Code 4.60.030, Historic Preservation Commission, and creating Anchorage Municipal Code of Regulations, AMCR 4.60, Municipality of Anchorage Local Landmark Register. Thank you. Public testimony is now open on this item. We do have one individual on the phone list, James Huddle.
Hello?
Hi, Mr. Huddle. This is Felix Rivera. You're here with the Anchorage Assembly. We are on public testimony for item 14C, AO 2021-32. You have 3 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Jim Hiddle, and I'm on the board of directors for the Anchorage Fur Rendezvous, and I'm also the chairman of the Anchorage Mushing District, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. I'm testifying in favor of Ordinance 2021-32 to establish a local landmark register. 4th Avenue from A to G Street was officially proclaimed the Anchorage Mushing District by Mayor Berkowitz in February of 2020. We have been working with the municipality's project management and engineering team on the 4th Avenue signal and lighting upgrades to be constructed this summer. They are including some of the design elements for this project in their project, such as the signage along 4th Avenue, identifying it as the Mushing District, widening the sidewalk area near 4th and D to accommodate a future arch that we intend to construct across 4th Avenue. And they're installing bronze dog paws, new sidewalks that we have sold to raise funds for this project. We are researching more than a dozen historic stories to be developed into interpretive signage in the Mushing District, many of them concerning dog team use in Anchorage in the early 1900s before the railroad was completed through to Fairbanks. And of course, we'll be featuring the World Championship sled dog races that go back to 1946, the Iditarod race back to 1972. We will apply to place the Mushing District on the local landmark register when this process is set up. As a retired architect who has been working in Anchorage for 50 years, I know there are many buildings, districts, and areas that deserve and need recognition on the local landmark register. To do so not only helps preserve these facilities and the stories surrounding them, but creates an attraction for tourists and locals alike. In recent years before the pandemic, I would go downtown just to watch the tourists. They often are just walking around 4th, 5th, and 6th with a map looking for something to see. If we can feature historic elements and stories with wayfinding to direct them, we will be able to attract more tourists, and just as important, we'll be able to keep them in Anchorage for a few days and not just watch them pass through Anchorage in one evening. So in closing, I urge you to pass this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
That completes our phone list. We'll go to in-person. Welcome. You're good. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Jenny Blanchard. I'm the current chair of the Municipality Historic Preservation Commission. And I've been on the commission for about 2 years now, and we've been working on this ordinance for several years before I was involved in this. And so we've spent a lot of time working on it, worked with a lot of people in the planning department, with municipality legal staff, and with the State Historic Preservation Office for several years to develop this ordinance. And we've done, commissioners and the Municipality Historic Preservation Officer have done presentations and gotten comments and spoken to the public at many community council meetings. Throughout the municipality, we've done several in the Eagle River, Chugach area, and we've been involved, one of our commissioners has been heavily involved with the Girdwood Board of Supervisors, speaking to them about this ordinance, and we've received several resolutions of support from some of those community councils. And, you know, I'm on the HBC because I really care about preserving the history and culture of our community. And I don't think we do enough to do that. I think we really just focus on development a lot here and not think about trying to tell the story of our past and all the different cultures who have lived here before we were here building office buildings. And I think that it's really important, and I really hope you guys will all choose to adopt this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a question for you from Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering if you could speak to how you have involved the Eklutna tribe in this work and how they're going to be involved in it moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, we have a member of the Eklutna tribe on the Historic Preservation Commission, and so he's been involved and been talking to the tribe as we've been developing this. We also have some of the categories. We're focusing not just, when you think of the local landmark register, I think a lot of people think of like a historic building downtown, like the gentleman on the phone was talking about, and that's a very important part of our history, but there are also a lot of traditional Denina sites and earlier cultural and traditional cultural properties and other sites like that that are really important to the Native people in our community. And so we really look forward to working with all of our tribal partners to nominate sites to the local landmark register if this is adopted, so that we can, tell the stories of all the cultures in Anchorage and not just the historic buildings, but also tell the stories of all the tribal residents of our community.
Thank you very much for testifying, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Thanks. So, thanks for your work on this.
You're welcome.
You told us it was a lot, and I don't doubt you. And I was curious, so what were the challenging parts in putting this together? We get a final product, we say, oh, it looks great, but you've worked through it, and you probably made lots of changes. What were the hurdles?
Well, I would say that, talking about making sure we were inclusive of all the different categories of properties that could be listed, and make sure that we're really thinking about, traditional cultural places and archaeological sites and historic buildings. And then probably one of the more challenging things was working through what the process would be to we're saying we're going to do this, and then we sit down and read it, and we're like, okay, well, wait, this doesn't make any sense for process for how a person, how just a resident who has a historic home that they want to preserve, for example, or recognize as a part of this registry, and how they would actually go through the process to get it nominated. And so we spent a lot of time just working through that and making sure that it was logical and that we could, it wasn't completely bureaucratic and crazy for somebody to be able to practically nominate something to the register. We had a lot of discussion with people about the age limit for properties. The National Register of Historic Places, things have to be 50 years old to be eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. With rare exceptions, there's a way to make exceptions so that they could register space race sites or something before they were 50 years old, the things of international, exceptional importance before they were 50 years old. But that's the main cutoff for that, for the National Register. And so we had a lot of back and forth about that. The ordinance has 30 years as the limit because we decided that, Anchorage is a young community in many ways, and there are a lot of important parts of our history and our story that are less than 50 years old. And so we went back and forth on that a lot, and we ended up with 30 years as the cutoff. And then we've also had a lot of back and forth about whether there should be a fee to nominate your property to the National Register. And we really want you guys to have input on that here. We went back and forth on that a lot and have had multiple votes and split votes on that on the commission. Right now, I think it's still a $100 fee on the proposal right now. And the commission was pretty evenly split on whether that was prohibitive or, that people really want to recognize it and want it to be a thing to be able to recognize a property on the local landmark register and that would want to pay the fee. And so we were all split on that. And then, whether for a while we were going to have it just like a nominal, $20 fee, like you would file anything in the planning department, and you have a nominal fee for filing paperwork. And so that was another option that we discussed and had considered for a while. And so that was one of the more contentious things that we've discussed.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Welton.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Monty Rogers. I'm an archaeologist. Mr. Perez Verdia is my assemblyman. I was a former Historic Preservation Commission member and chair and spent 3 years working on this ordinance as well. And I encourage you to pass it, to support it, with one change. I encourage you to eliminate the fee. As you will note in the Planning and Zoning Commission's report, the Historic Preservation Commission was against the fee. The municipality was for the fee. I have a couple of issues with the fee. One, I don't think you should charge people to promote their histories. Two, the fee is collected when the Municipal Historic Preservation Officer deems the packet complete. Not when the property is nominated or something like that. So a citizen could submit the application, it's complete, they pay for it, and then the commission decides it is not eligible. That citizen now, their work is done. They can always resubmit, of course, but they're out $100 and they'll have to submit another $100. So I would urge you guys to strike the fee from this, but otherwise support it. It does a lot of good in promoting Anchorage's, Chugiak, Eagle River, Aklutna, Girdwood's history, whether it be indigenous history, Polynesian history, Korean history, but a variety of histories across this place. And that is all for my testimony.
Great. Thank you. I have a couple questions for you. We'll start with Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sir, I actually don't have any questions about the ordinance. I wanted to ask you about your sweatshirt. I don't see Igiagik no Siem sweatshirts very often. I lived there for a summer as a kid, and I was wondering if you spent time there and if you knew the salmon family.
I do know the salmon family well. I go out there usually a few times a year.
Wonderful.
I do a lot of archaeological and ethnographic work with the community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Staying on topic. So I'm curious about the fee. You know, I was in Raleigh probably about a month ago, and it seemed like every quarter mile they had a pole with a metal plaque that said some historic bit of information. It was tremendous because they go way back. You know, they're 600-700 years. You know, and it was real educational and fun. But those things probably aren't cheap. $100 wouldn't make a dent in it. So in the fees, what are the fees for?
The fees are, it's a little vague in the ordinance, which is why I was, so let's see. The application fee reads, it's an application fee based on a sliding scale, be assessed after the nomination has been determined complete. The application fee will be used to support the Anchorage Historic Preservation Program, including the management of the local landmark register, and will be directly deposited in the Historic Preservation Fund 740. And if they want a plaque like the one you're describing, that is another fee. And I have no objection to, and that's optional, and that fee is not explicit in there. They state that there is a fee if you would like a plaque, and I have no objection to that. I just have the nomination fee objection.
Okay, so you know, did you guys talk about styles of plaques to keep them uniform?
It was discussed that some people may want to put a plaque up or something like that, and they could work with the Muni, the Historic Preservation, to come up with something, and there would be a fee charge. But there was never a design and review process for a plaque or any sort of budget developed for the plaquing. Is that a word?
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Oh, actually, one more. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering, do you think that someone who owned, say, a building and was trying to get it listed on the historic register might be doing that to increase the property's value and then try to sell it?
I would say if they're smart, they would.
In the microphone, please.
I would say if they're smart, that they would. Historic properties usually have a higher value. And that is okay. This is a volunteer program. You have to have the owner's permission to do this. So someone randomly just can't roll up and nominate your house and
Right.
Without your permission. And say there's like 3 people who own a house or a building. You need 51% of the owners to agree. And say you buy a house or you buy a historic building, and it's on the landmark, you can opt out of that. I said it's volunteer, owner permission based, and we really want to stress that. And then we also put in there an appeals process. If folks didn't like the decision that the Historic Preservation Commission came up with, they could appeal. So.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Yep.
Would anyone else like to testify on this item? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony is closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. We have a couple of amendments. First, we'll start with LaFrance Amendment Number 1. Is there a motion?
Move LaFrance Amendment Number 1.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment just provides some context for the whereas number 1. And while I know that for folks who've been working on this, and thank you to the commission for your hard work these last few years, when I read this, I didn't realize that it was referring to a specific section in code that prescribes the powers and duties of the commission. It's in the AM, but this just adds it to the AO. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, members may proceed to vote on LaFrance Amendment Number 1.
Mr. Presverdia?
Yes.
That amendment is approved 10-0. Next, we have Zolotel Rivera Amendment Number 2. Is there a motion?
I move Zolotel Rivera Amendment Number 2.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Ms. Zolotel, can you speak to this, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. This reduces the fees in the fee table by half to $50, $75, $100, and $150. It represents a compromise between the Historic Preservation Commission and the Planning Department based on what we heard at the work session.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Yeah, for me, I hope that we can support this amendment in some form. I wouldn't myself be opposed to an amendment to the amendment to reduce the amount further. I do, before I go too far, want to just ask for the Planning Department. I don't know if Ms. McNulty or if someone else would like to speak to this. But could you speak again to the purpose of the fee, and if we were to try to reduce it to the minimal amount to cover the cost, what that would be?
Mr. Chair, this is Christine Bunnell. I'm the Historic Preservation Officer for the Muni and staff to the Historic Preservation Commission. And first of all, I just want to thank Monty and Jenny for being there tonight. They did a phenomenal job helping us get this ordinance done and bringing it forward to you all. The commission was split on the fee. Those that were in the real estate department felt that it was really a benefit and that homeowners, property owners would look at it as, oh, I've got this historic property and it's important to go ahead and pay this fee, and they didn't feel that it was an issue. As far as the planning department goes, we would like to see somewhat of a fee on there, and again, as it says in the ordinance, it goes directly into the Historic Preservation Fund to help us continue doing historic preservation projects across the municipality. Hope that answers your question.
If I may, there was actually one part that you didn't answer, which is if we were to, well, I guess since it goes to the fund, it doesn't really cover costs. Okay, so you did answer my question. Thanks. So one final comment before I turn it back over. So for me, if we can reduce the fee even further, I think that's a good idea, because speaking of excitement to actually use this ordinance, at a presentation of the Airport Heights Community Council, that particular council was really excited to name things, but wasn't exactly properties, but they were really excited to name things in the green belt next to the council, and in particular name things after indigenous historical names of those places. So, I think there's some appetite in the community to do that, and the more that we allow this to happen, the more that we can honor that history. So with that, I will go ahead and take back the gavel and go to Mr. Weddleton.
A couple of questions for Ms. Bunnell. How many would you expect? I imagine out the gate there's probably a pent-up demand and you get 100 requests, I don't know, 50 or 1,000. And, it does seem like, these aren't really high fees. If it's someone who owns a building, this is a relatively small amount of money. But it could be important. I'm thinking that you would print little pamphlets that, give to tourists or something that show where these are, to the different marketing items and so on. Is that the kind of thing that this money would go to?
So currently, thank you through the chair, Mr. Weddleton, Christine Bunnell again. Currently, with the Historic Preservation Fund, and this is what's been actually happening historically through the years when the fund was appropriated way back in the late 70s, early 80s, the fund was used to actually restore historic buildings within the Anchorage area, as well as buy conservation easements and things like that. Since I've been here for almost 10 years, the Historic Preservation Fund was down to around $200,000. And what we've been doing through the commission, the Historic Preservation Commission, is using the fund to actually match the grants that we receive to do different projects throughout the municipality. So about 9 years ago, we provided match funding to take care of the Pioneer Schoolhouse, put a new roof on it, and a new upstairs on the 3rd floor. Right now, currently, Mr. Weddleton, in your district, out in Girdwood, we've used the Historic Preservation Fund to match some State Historic Preservation Office grant funding to do a historic and cultural survey out there in Girdwood. So there's a lot of different ways that we use the fund, but there's not a lot of ways for the commission or the planning department to actually raise money to replenish that fund. And so that's why the fees were proposed. The only group that we know of that's lined up right now to make a nomination is the Mushing District, and I just really appreciate their support, and we're excited about them.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have some questions kind of along the lines of Mr. Weddleton's, and that is in regard to, is there any criteria or standards by which these funds are actually used, or is it just always a case-by-case situation? And the reason why I ask is because it does say in the AM that there is an outreach component to how the funds are to be used. So I was just wondering if that was actually also included in there, which kind of speaks to Mr. Weddleton's question about whether any pamphlets are actually printed and distributed. So anyway, can you tell me a little bit about how the commission actually comes to some kind of decision on how funds will be used? Thanks.
Yes, thank you through the chair, Ms. Kennedy. Christine Bonnell again. The Historic Preservation Commission makes a recommendation on how the funds can be used. So like I said, for matching a grant, we have done publications where we've published the brochures for the Oscar Anderson House. Each one of these expenditures is always brought forward to the Anchorage Assembly, and the Assembly approves those expenditures. That is how the fund is set up.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we might be, we might have missed that a time or two, but thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. So I would like to approach this from a different direction. And so I'm going to make an amendment. I hope someone will second just so we can discuss it. And the amendment would be to strike the changes proposed and add a phrase that is, the director may reduce or waive this fee at their discretion.
Second.
Thank you. And so the reason I suggest this is because I agree with Mr. Weddleton that most people who see this sum, property owners and people with investments that want to see them labeled historically significant, have the resources to do that. And this doesn't get anywhere near paying the cost of these things. But there probably are individuals and projects that are worthy of consideration and have actual need. And so instead of us creating a starved system that hasn't got enough resources, that follows a trajectory of minimizing the fund completely, we could instead leave a standard fee and provide discretion of the director to make that call. And in that way, we hit the equity buttons, we hit the revenue buttons, and don't push it off to the taxpayer in the full.
Thank you. All right, so we now have the amendment to the amendment on the table. Ms. Alatel?
Yeah, I believe my comments germane to the amendment. I was going to point out that in the application fee paragraph, it does say that nomination for municipal resources initiated by the commission are exempt from application fee. And I think that may speak to the example that the chair raised if the community council went through the commission for those on the those items they've identified along the green belt, that there would be a way to proceed without the fee. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson on the amendment to the amendment?
Yes, thank you. I figured this out, but what is a district contributing resource, 1 through 15, and 16 through 20, and 31? I'm trying to figure out what that is. What is the district contributing resource?
I think that would be a question for Christine.
Bonnell. Yeah. Ms. Bonnell?
Thank you, Mr. Peterson, through the chair. A contributing resource, and I may ask if Jenny's there, if she could maybe step up to the podium and she could help answer this too. Many times in a district, you might have, for example, Block 13 in South Addition, if you all are aware of where that is, it's between 10th and 11th Avenue and 8th Street in Cordova. Block 13 is listed on the National Register. There are several homes in there. Several of those homes have received remodels, and they did not retain the integrity of what their original home looked like. So those homes within that Block 13 would be considered contributing, and then the homes that had the integrity would be the ones that would be considered historic. And let me let Jenny chime in there a little bit too.
Yeah, I mean, Christine summarized it pretty well, but basically, like, for example, there's a Government Hill Historic District. Every house in Government Hill is not a part of the historic district. There are contributing properties to that, and so you say, 1570 and 1590 are contributing properties to the Government Historic District. Another example, like a more archaeological or tribal example, you could say that we're going to nominate a Chester Creek archaeological district or historic landscape. And, these are the discrete sites along that are contributing to that district.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you. I'm sorry, ma'am, I have a question for you as well. I'm sorry, it was Jenny, I'm sorry, what was your last name?
Jenny Blanchard.
Thank you, Ms. Blanchard. So I'm wondering, on the amendment to the amendment, I don't know if you were tracking, but which of these two versions do you prefer? Do you prefer we go with the discretion and the full fees, or the, it applies every time, but the fees are halved?
Was your intent, Mr. Constant, that it's the planning director's discretion?
And it even could be crafted at the planning director's discretion on the advice of the commission.
I mean, I guess I could go either way. I mean, I definitely fell on the side of having a lower fee, to make sure that there aren't any barriers to people nominating things, and also, again, nominating a district or something like that. I definitely think we should have a lower fee, but I also see that, we have this fee, but you can certainly waive it if you think that's appropriate. I think that would be another way to do it. I think either way would accomplish what we need to accomplish, while still giving a little bit of money to the Historic Preservation Fund.
Thank you. I think based on that, I have a comment then, since we're in debate. Thank you, ma'am. So I think I prefer the original Zalatel Rivera amendment to Mr. Constant's proposed amendment to the amendment. And I think it's, in a perfect world, I think that Mr. Constant's amendment to the amendment makes a lot of sense. I'm just thinking about what we've done is create a sort of an additional level of bureaucracy, or perhaps a little more time. Just thinking about, you'd have to get the planning director to sign off on that discretion and or that make the discretionary choice. And I think just knowing just how these things work in the real world, I think that could delay approval by some fairly significant time. And so I think these are relatively modest amounts, and so I think a low amount that just applies every time, that allows things to get through quickly, is my preference. But if your amendment passes, so be it. I think they're both good ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
And I just think that, the speaker, Ms. Blanchard, suggested that either one would meet the needs of the commission and the mission of the preservation effort, but only one of them actually helps to contribute to the fund and do expand the work and pay for some of the expenses associated with the work that's being done, because the staff are actually compiling and going through processes and reviewing documents and creating reports and presenting reports on behalf of the commission to the assembly, to wherever it has to go, community councils. And so I think one of these paths actually covers both, and one of them only covers one. So I would respectfully ask you to support my amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My preference is actually for the lower fees and the director discretion. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further discussion, members may proceed to vote on the amendment to the amendment. We're just taking a little bit of dealing with a quick technical issue. So give us a little time.
Mr. Presverdia?
No.
That amendment to the amendment fails 7-3. We're now back to the main amendment. Is there any further discussion? Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to move an amendment to add in the language of the director discretion that Mr. Constant had proposed.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Do you want to speak to that?
Only that I thought that was a good idea that Mr. Constant proposed and support it.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on this new amendment to the amendment? Seeing none, members may proceed to vote on the amendment to the amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Presverdia?
No.
That amendment to the amendment is approved 7-3. We're now on the main amendment. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, members may proceed to vote on Zolotel Rivera Amendment Number 2.
Mr. Presverdia?
Yes.
That amendment is approved 8-2. All right, we are now on the main motion. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, members may proceed to vote on the main motion to approve.
Mr. Presverdia?
Yes.
That item is approved 10-0. Congratulations. Next, we have item 14E, ordinance number AO 2021-34, an ordinance of the Anchorage Assembly repealing and reenacting Anchorage Municipal Code sections 26.80.060, closure and post-closure care liability, and 26.80.065, closure and post-closure care restricted cash and investment account. Public testimony is now open on this item. There's no one on the phone list. Would anyone like to testify in person? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony is closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, members may proceed to vote.
Mr. Presverdia?
Yes.
That item is approved 10-0. Next, we have item 14F, ordinance number AO 2021-35, an ordinance of the Municipality of Anchorage, Alaska, amending ordinance number 2018-76 to increase the aggregate principal amount of the solid waste refuse collection utility and solid waste disposal utility revenue bonds and/or notes. John.
Waive reading.
Thank you. Public testimony is now open on this item. There's no one on the phone list. Would anyone in person like to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony is closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, members may proceed to vote.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. I actually do have some questions just for clarification, and it will probably answer my questions for the next one as well. So appreciate Mr. Slivka being here. So my question is in regard to kind of how all this is really being coordinated. I understand that we're basically using the, what I would call, I don't want to say extra funds, but the additional funds to basically put that into a pool where we could actually use it for bonding purposes as well. So the 26 million will actually be used to help promote a bigger bond capacity for SWS. Is that true?
Through the chair, Alex Slifka, Chief Fiscal Officer, and also on the phone, Mark Spafford, just in case we need technical questions. The answer is they all go together, and it's been a year-long process. The reason we came to this is that there were a number of projects that needed to be done, the leachate project, the Cell 9 project, and in order to bring those forward, through the revision to the code, we were able to pull this money out of the landfill fund. So that the monies will be pulled, but then they will be used primarily to put these projects into place now. So they're not going to sit around. They're going to be utilized so that we will have to not have to change rates beyond what we've already said we're going to do. And I'll stop there.
Okay, well, I guess to get to my bigger question is, I'm wondering if it makes financial sense, or it's just sound financial practice to use this money, to stop paying into the fund, the annual payment, and use that instead for paying off bonds.
The answer to that question is no. The fact of the matter is that solid waste for many, many, many years neglected a lot of the capital work that needed to be done. And so they're in a position now where, as you've seen, they're building the transfer station. And so by pulling these funds out, we are borrowing less money. I mean, up until they started the transfer station project several years ago, they had little to no debt, but they also had little to no equity. And so this is why we've been on a multi-year plan for raising rates so that we can get to a point where we could borrow enough money to rebuild the transfer station. And so it is the best path to pull this money out and to use it to complete these projects. The other thing that happens is that there are ongoing deposits because the structure as it existed today meant that you and I and everybody before us paid for the complete liability of the post-closure fund, and it would be possible that people for the next 40 years would pay nothing while utilizing the landfill. So this accomplishes the purpose of bringing forward these projects that are necessary for the entire municipality, and also creates equity where people today and people in the future are paying their proportionate share for the closure and post-closure liability.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chair, one more question. Thanks. We've had a situation in this state where we have used funds that were above the required liability status, and it was a great decision at the time, but it turned out that things changed over time, actuarials changed, such as that, and then we found ourselves, and I'm talking about the state retirement system, and then we found ourselves with a totally different picture. Is there a possibility that that could happen here as well? And what is the risk of really doing this right now versus making sure that we really do keep the money where it's intended to be and we don't get caught short? If we do get caught short, then what would we do? Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. So the plan as laid out is that there would be deposits, there's a regular schedule of deposits modeled out for the next 40 years. And those deposits total, I believe, over $100 million. And over the next 40 years, I think they earned somewhere in excess of $300 million toward the total cost in the future of the closure and the post-closure. So the answer, of course, is yes.
things could change, but we're taking a very conservative approach to this from the standpoint that we are assuming investment returns on the funds of 5.5%. We're assuming 3% inflation, so a real return of roughly 2% over the next 40 years. So we think we've taken a very conservative approach toward making sure that there is money for this closure and post-closure liability when that liability does occur, which is today, 40 years in the future. And as Mr. Spafford would tell you, when this project is completed, there will be much more opportunity for recycling, so the life of the landfill probably gets extended. And if we really do go forward with the waste-to-energy project, then the life gets extended by a significant amount. So we're making this recommendation because we think it's prudent now, and it accomplishes some very big goals, both for solid waste as well as the entire municipality. And in that, I'm talking about AWU and the reduction in leachate waste, which creates liabilities for them. And funding those projects is a huge benefit to AWU.
Thank you, Mr. Slivka. It all makes me quite nervous, Mr. Chair, but thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the same reaction at first as Ms. Kennedy did, and was thinking of the police and fire liability in that situation. And I thank Mr. Slivka and Mr. Spafford and Ms. Thomerson for sitting down with me and going through the 3 ordinances, or 2 ordinances and the 1 resolution. But I did want to confirm, Mr. Slivka, you had said there is a 5-year review, or every 5 years the liability assumptions will be reviewed. Did I understand correctly?
I think in code what it actually says is the liability study gets done every 10 years, but the amount of liability being accrued is reviewed every 5 years. And really the purpose of this is it gives solid waste a lot better operational stability. Where they were before is the asset and liability would be calculated at the end of every year, and if there was a difference, they had to make it up. So we think this, yes, we review it. Obviously, there's a board that is overseeing all of this, but every 5 years, they go back and recalculate and see if they need to make any adjustments.
Okay, thanks. And so based on the current projections, if this amount wasn't taken out of the fund and used now to perhaps extend the life of the landfill, then there wouldn't be a need to have any more payments for 40 years? Is that correct?
Well, it's possible, because where we sit today, the liability is, I think, 37 million, and that amount of assets is 42 million. So over the next several years, it's highly probable that there would be no required deposit. And it really creates a level of inequity between everybody who has used the landfill up until today and those who would use it going into the future.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so if we're able to extend the life of the landfill, then we'll have even additional years to pay back this loan if it turns out that financial times change and we need additional time to pay this off for some reason. Is that correct?
That would be correct. If the life of the landfill gets extended, then that nominally reduces the amount of the liability. And what most likely would happen is that we would just reduce the level of payments that we have modeled into the future.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, members may proceed to vote.
Mr. Presverdia?
Yes.
That item is approved 8-2. Next, we have item 14G, resolution number AR 2021-93, a resolution of the Anchorage Assembly authorizing the disbursement of an amount not to exceed $26 million from the Anchorage Regional Landfill Closure and Post-Closure Investment Fund.
Wait, reading.
Thank you. Public testimony is now open on this item. We don't have anyone on the phone list. Would anyone in person like to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony is closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks, and I want to thank Mr. Slivka for spending time going through all three of these with me as well, and kind of figuring this out. I read them all a couple times. Every time I read them, I got less understanding, so it really helped. And I listened to the committee meeting on it, too. One thing I had in this, I agree with the idea. I looked at, wait a minute, we're taking out more than half of this. Does this make sense? And thinking of the police retirement fund here, that was totally went sideways. But it does look like this is somewhat of a different issue here, kind of with the stability. I think we're only going to use it longer. Just the dynamic of the dump is not such a risk. And then I went through the HDR report that kind of tallied up the cost ultimately of doing it and the net present value, and it looked in line with where we're landing on this. One thing, another issue on this, it's okay, we're taking this out, so people overpaid, shouldn't they get money back? And I thought, well, that's probably really tricky to do, but in a sense, if we're using it for capital projects that all users are benefiting from, it kind of has some comfort that that's kind of like paying them back. It's not just going to be burned through with operating funds, but having, to increase their cash is a benefit, for alleviating risk and then using it for these capital projects that have immediate need. We have a pretty serious issue sending that leachate to the water utility. That could be $1 billion liability if we have to do secondary treatment there. And if we can avoid that with things like drying out the leachate, that'll be a real benefit. So anyway, I'm comfortable with this, and thanks again, Mr. Slivka.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, just one note. It's not paying it back, it's paying it forward. It's everyone investing in the future.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, members may proceed to vote.
Mr. Presverdia?
Yes.
That item is approved 8-2. The next items on the agenda involve applications for a liquor or marijuana license and/or a special land use permit for alcohol or marijuana. The process to review these items is different than the Assembly's legislative role because these are administrative or quasi-judicial hearings and require the Assembly to be impartial, refrain from ex parte communications, except in liquor license applications, and make a decision based only on the record before us and testimony today. With that, we now have item 15A before us, resolution number AR 2021-96, resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly stating its conditional protest regarding the renewal of package store liquor license number 4919 for KDAJ Investment Group Inc. DBA Alaska Liquor.
Reading.
Thank you. Public testimony is now open on this item. We don't have anyone on the phone list. Would anyone in person like to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony is closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, members may proceed to vote.
Mr. Presverdia?
Yes.
That item is approved 10-0. Next, we have item 15B, resolution number AR 2021-97, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly stating its conditional protest regarding the renewal of beverage dispensary tourism liquor license number 1987 for Alaskan Edge Inc., DBA Brown Bear Saloon and Motel.
Waive reading.
Thank you. Public testimony is now open on this item. We don't have anyone on the phone list. Would anyone in person like to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony is closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, members may proceed to vote.
Mr. Presverdia?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy? That item is approved 10-0. Next, we have item 15C, resolution number AR 2021-101, Resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly approving a modification to a previously approved special land use permit for Alaska Joint Ventures LLC, a marijuana cultivation facility with license number M11920, doing business as Voodoo Cannabis Company.
Waive reading.
Thank you. Public testimony is now open on this item. There's no one on the phone list. Would anyone in person like to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony is closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Mr. Weddleton.
The Community and Economic Development Committee looked at this very closely at our meeting on Thursday the 8th, and we recommended approval.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, members may proceed to vote.
Mr. Presberdia?
Yes.
Mr. Weddleton? That item is approved 10-0. That completes our regular business. We're going to go ahead and move on to final audience participation. We're going to start with anyone who signed up for final audience participation, then we'll go to the priority list, and then we'll go to anyone else who would like to speak in person. So first, we will start with Chelsea Foster.
Hello?
Hi, Ms. Foster. This is Felix Rivera. You're here with the Anchorage Assembly. We are on final audience participation. You have 3 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you. For the record, Chelsea Foster. Good evening, Anchorage Assembly. Tonight, I simply want to offer words of encouragement and support to those on this Assembly who have stood by their constituents and taken their health and public safety seriously during this past year. Thank you to all who continued to vote on the EOs last night. It's very appreciated. In addition, I would also like to congratulate the chair for keeping his seat. I am proud to have you as an Anchorage Assembly member. You have done and continue to do a tremendous job. Please continue to keep it up and know that you're very supported in the seat that you're in. As summer is around the corner, I hope that we can all continue to do our part in our community by keeping each other safe simply by wearing masks, social distancing, and washing your hands. I thank everybody for their time this evening.
Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our priority final audience participation list. First, we have Toby Ventura.
Thank you for calling. I'm unavailable to answer.
Okay. Next, we will go to Amber Glasser.
Hello?
Hi, Ms. Glasser. This is Felix Rivera. You're here with the Anchorage Assembly. We are on final audience participation. You have 3 minutes. Welcome.
All right, let me pull over. I'm driving. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. My name is Amber Glasser, and I want to go on record and say
I am not anti-vaccine. I am pro-informed consent. My body, my choice. I've been studying this stuff since 2008. I started researching because my sister died when I was 9 years old of sudden infant death. As I told you last night, I know in my heart it was an adverse reaction to the MMR. I was so afraid I would lose my son the same way I lost my sister. And sudden infant death didn't make any sense. She was so healthy and so perfect. As I began researching, I realized sudden infant death is listed as a possible side effect in the vaccine insert from the pharmaceutical companies. It was in that moment that I realized it wasn't sudden infant death. It was the vaccine that took her precious life. People don't believe me. They call me crazy, and that's okay. I know the truth. After I posted my testimony from last night, a longtime friend decided to call me out. She says to me, "Disgusting. Are you fine with politicizing the death of your sister?" To that I say, why is the government politicizing personal and private health choices? She also said, if I keep lying about the past, the real story will come out. I really don't know what she means by that. Sometimes I feel like Eminem from the movie 8 Mile. Let's just tell the whole story, because I don't have anything to hide. I'm not ashamed of my past, one bit. If you don't know who Eminem is, look him up. And while you're at it, look up Tom McDonald and listen to the song Fake Woke. My sister did not die in vain. She died so that I could learn the truth. Thank you, Bernadette. I am so sick and tired of playing these games. The description I'm about to read to you is straight off the HRSA.gov website. The National Vaccine and Injury Compensation Program is a no-fault alternative to the traditional legal system for resolving vaccine injury petitions. It was created in the 1980s after lawsuits against vaccine companies and healthcare providers. I'm going to stop right there. A no-fault alternative? Let's think about that for a minute. It is extremely hard to prove you were injured from your vaccine. You can report it and you can petition for compensation, but you won't always get it. And it takes years. I've read and heard thousands of the most heartbreaking stories. I want everyone to know you can always get vaccinated, but you can never take it back. These vaccines are under emergency use authorization only. They are not FDA approved. Please correct me if I am wrong. I'm encouraging everyone to look that up and really understand what it means. The FDA and the CDC are not your friends. To my friend that felt it was necessary to be nasty, I love you and I forgive you. And to the Assembly for being tyrannical, I love you and I forgive you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Next, we have Tammy Smith.
Hello?
Hi, Ms. Smith. This is Felix Rivera. You're here with the Anchorage Assembly. We are on final audience participation. You have 3 minutes. Welcome.
I testified yesterday, so I'm good for now. I already said what I needed to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Next, we have Rochelle Alger.
Hi, you reached Rochelle. Thanks for calling. Leave me a message.
Next, we have Karen Hennegas. Eugene, you're up next if you can come up to the dais, please.
Hello, you have reached the voicemail of Karen Henniger.
Next, we have Mr. Eugene Carl Haberman. Welcome.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman, 43 years in Alaska, 20 of those years Anchorage resident, and currently a Massachusetts Valley resident. I follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, the decision made by the governing body is more likely in the public interest. I like to focus my comments to the distressing witnessing of what happened last night. And I don't mean by the decisions of the Assembly, but the decorum in this room. The failure continue of people interfering with other people speaking, creating a rally, and it's showing, and I've said it before, and it's continued, you were addressing an issue dealing with the emergency, whether or not to continue it. But what's happening here was intimidation, not only to members of the public, and fearing what they would be able to say, one way or the other, on the phone and here, but also to the Assembly members and administration and people who are in this room. This is not ending. It was a brief break to previous regular Assembly meetings when we didn't witness that decorum issue. But I knew it was a short break because those members would come back from the community and ignore freedom and responsibility and lack of respect. But I also now would like to address the decision made by the Assembly. It's alarming because many of you still don't get it. It's a world health emergency. We all play a part in dealing with it. We cannot tell people to come and visit Alaska and our governor is saying we're going to spend a lot of money to convince people to visit Alaska when we are not dealing with our responsibility in dealing with COVID. The message is coming clear that the largest city in Anchorage was just a narrow window of votes to say no more masks. And when one member of the Assembly says, well, we could get rid of the proposed mandate, but we could have masks and require it. Well, let me remind you, a short history ago, that was tried here as an ordinance. It failed. It failed. So you're going to tell me the one reason why there's masks is still here is because of the emergency ordinance. And let me also remind you, the administration's proposal was simply watered down, and it was simply basically asking for social distancing and masks. And for those out there who are fighting this, you're confusing freedom and responsibility, and I plead with the people in the Valley, stop this wild, wild west. You're not helping people going back to work in the future and people to stay in business. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Erica Johnson.
Hi, you've reached Erica Johnson's
Next, we have Amber Sword.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated...
Last, we have Allison Lonzer.
Welcome to the voicemail of...
That completes our priority list, so we'll go ahead and move on to anyone else who would like to participate. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Robert Moore. I am a homeowner in East Anchorage. I have been an Anchorage resident for just shy of 20 years. I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I'm a father of 4 girls, 3 biological, 1 foster, soon to adopt, with ages ranging from 15 to age of 6. Not only do I spend my days working full-time and supporting their schooling at home, but I also have to try to explain to them why they can't play on the play equipment at McDonald's here in town, yet are able to out in the valley. I listen to the 6-year-old cry because she can't have a birthday party with all of her friends, or have any fun outside, or even be a kid. And did I mention I am a foster parent? But what I didn't tell you is that she has special needs with Down syndrome, who at 7 years old doesn't understand wearing a mask, who also tries to eat the mask. But God forbid she not have it on to go into a store or restaurant. We get refused service, because people don't care that for her it's a choking hazard, just as long as she is wearing a stupid mask. As far as getting a hold of an OCS caseworker, as somebody said last night, it's only a matter of making a phone call. As a matter of fact, I called and talked to her caseworker today, and I called her directly. The excuses you people have come up with to continue the facade of having power is cowardice and unjustified. You have had doctors testify that extending the emergency order is unnecessary and uncalled for. You were voted into office by the people to represent the people and work for the people. And you are not following that, what the majority of the people have been saying for months. Those of you that voted to continue the power trip should be ashamed of yourselves. To those of you who voted to end this, I applaud you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Allard, sir, actually I have a question for you.
Can you email me your information? I have somebody who will help you with that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
My name is Jacob Matthews, and I would like to address remote patient monitoring. Remote patient monitoring should be more accessible because it can help doctors monitor their patients without the patient having to make multiple trips to the doctor's office every month. Currently, it is $85,000 and covered by Medicare, and I believe it should be more accessible and available to everyone and with every different type of health insurance. So more patients are able, and doctors are able to have that option available to them. Doctors and patients can both use it to help monitor them with their recovery from COVID and other viruses and diseases. One use of this would be to monitor patients with heart conditions. Patients with heart conditions often have to make multiple trips to the doctor's office every month, with most of them being unnecessary, and sometimes them having to actually be made. The use of remote patient monitoring would be helpful for the patient so they could live more of a free life And even now, it would be more useful to them so they don't have to risk getting COVID by going to the doctor's office. There are obviously some disadvantages, like it being invasive, in some cases, and it being very expensive. And I believe everyone should have that option no matter what. You guys personally should think about it because you never know, anyone in your life could have a heart condition and you not know about it. And it would be useful to them if they don't have the medical ability or the health insurance that would cover it, and they'd have to pay for it out of their own pocket. And that could set them back multiple years in a lot of things. And I believe doctors should have that option because it could help them find problems with their patients that their patients didn't know about that could possibly be life-threatening. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Actually, I have a couple questions for you, starting with Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, could you repeat your name? I didn't catch it.
Jacob Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. My question is, the remote patient monitoring does sound like a great idea. I'm curious, is there something in our code, is there something in municipality that's preventing this from going forward? Or is this a state issue, or what could we do?
I feel that you could approve it and help that be more accessible to the local area and make that, and with that, and it could have a huge impact on that, giving the people across the state and country an idea of how it could be used.
Okay, so are we preventing it right now? I mean, is there a law that we have that's preventing this?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very informative.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Thanks. So when you say remote patient monitoring, is that the same as telemedicine?
To some people, yes. To some people, no. Because with some people, it could just be teleconferences with their doctor. But to others, it could be having something implanted in their body to help monitor their heart and other factors of their body.
Okay, because I think during the pandemic, there's been a lot of telemedicine going on, and my understanding is it took a special permission or change at the state level to allow that, and I have no idea what the status is. But we've had people testify that, they were doing telemedicine. A psychiatrist spoke yesterday, and I think others over the month. So I think it is happening. You're just saying it's most insurers don't pay, or?
Yeah, that is exactly what I'm saying.
Okay. All right, thank you. Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thanks for coming to speak tonight. Could you do me a favor? Could you email the Assembly your testimony, please?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Back to you, sir.
Thank you. All right, would anyone else like to speak? Okay, seeing no one, then that completes final audience participation. We'll go ahead and move on to Assembly comments. We'll start on this side with Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to acknowledge again, thank all the people that came out to testify last night and tonight. Always want to encourage people to come out and to voice their opinion and ideas. They are really valued. It's an important part of this process. Also want to thank the administration for all of their work over the last year and the difficult decisions that they've made related to this pandemic and the city of Anchorage, and acknowledgement and thanks to my colleagues on the Assembly for all of your hard work. Really appreciate it. Wish everybody a good night, and that's all my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to acknowledge the comments we received last night around the emergency order and the vaccination goal. I have been in contact with the administration and asked that they look at that information and revise or reissue the emergency order to be more in line with the conversation we had last night. Mr. Dunbar provided some clarification that it's really, or asked some questions which provided some clarification, which really indicates we're looking at a number of health metrics, and we do have the risk matrix on the COVID-19 website. So I'm asking them to take another look. I know it was not their intent to in any way say one metric would control, and I don't think it is that way. It just, I would like there to be more clarity for the public because it did seem to raise some alarm. Other than that, I hope the weather stays in spring mode because my garden is growing inside and I would love to be able to plant it outside before August. So I hope everyone gets an opportunity to enjoy, hopefully, some nice temperatures this weekend. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I too had a bit of a reflection on something that I heard last night and didn't really think about it until after. There was somebody who came in and I think unintentionally sparked a thought. They made an argument that somehow these efforts we've had to go through to secure our public health and begin to rebuild the economy through certain mandates, which include masks, which include other distancing requirements, et cetera, which again, I don't like, but I do because I recognize the value. They argued that flu has been reduced 99% this year. And they argued somehow that that should be evidence against the use of masks and distancing. And it's amazing to me to think, like maybe in their minds they thought that magically the flu went down somehow. But something actually broke the back of the flu this year. And so they try to say that that's evidence of something. I think it's evidence that these masks, in fact, do the job that the public health professionals tell us that they do. And I think that the big difference between infectiousness between the flu and COVID is the fact that COVID is just, it's novel. It comes and it hits you. People don't even know because their bodies just have no defense against it. And we had no science. And so I look to the 99% reduction plus in flu infections this year as an amazing measure of how much the distancing has worked for us and the masks. So that was a reflection I had after the meeting last night. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Two comments. First, I found out today that according to the state website, that Anchorage has passed 50% of eligible folks now vaccinated, which is, I think, a tremendous milestone that we should celebrate. And it means that we are not so far off that goal, given that now we have significantly more supply than when we started. It also means that a majority of the people who are eligible for the COVID-19 vaccination have gotten at least the first shot. So I'm hopeful that that news can be publicized. The second thing I'd like to say, I want to thank, and I know my colleagues will do this at other times and places as well, but I want to thank the clerk's office for the election we just had and for the incredible work that they put in. They are counting the very last of the votes from the first round. It looks like we will have 3 or 4 new school board members at our next joint meeting, which is a very interesting outcome. But in general, they put in a tremendous amount of work. We know it takes a lot to put on an election and to maintain the public's trust, to get the ballots out, and to preserve the integrity of our institution. And so I want to say thank you so much to the clerk's office and the additional election employees that were brought on for a tremendous first round. And for better or worse, and partially my fault, we have another election in 4 weeks. So I'll see you then. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess since we are making a few comments over last night's attendance and a lot of the comments being made there, I think one thing that I always take away from any kind of a public testimony time is that everyone's opinion is valid. And a lot of times, you know, it is absolutely their opinion, and you cannot argue with that. You might be able to try to argue facts, but a lot of times even facts are up for interpretation. And so I think my interpretation of why we had no flu this year is because we closed down our schools, we shut down our public facilities, we had people working from home, and all of us, you know, did work from home, even doing committee meetings, and some of us certainly worked from homes doing regular assembly meetings. So people were just home. They weren't out there together. They weren't spreading anything, whether it was a cold or the flu, and for the most part, we weren't really spreading COVID. So I think there were a lot of dynamics that were unusual for a typical flu season, and obviously just the fact that most people were staying home out of crowds, and certain businesses were certainly closed down. Theaters, you know, those places that tend to attract large groups, and we just didn't have that. The other thing that I think was a really good lesson this year was we all need to get used to the fact that if you're sick, you stay home. And normally, you know, we're a tough breed, and don't you just really want to pat that one on the back that comes to work even though they're dragging and they're sick and they look awful? And, you know, typically we would just commend somebody for going ahead and going to work when they're in that awful of shape. Well, we didn't do that this year. We actually told people, hey, you're sick, stay home, we don't want you here. And I think maybe we've learned that lesson the hard way too, is that now let's just make sure that if somebody's sick, yeah, stay home. We really don't want you spreading whatever germ it is. So anyway, one of those lessons learned. But I did kind of want to just mention, I believe we have a report due from the municipality in regard to the homeless plan for shutting down the Sullivan, and that's due tomorrow. So, okay, so, and Ms. Zolotel is confirming that. So, so anyway, looking forward to seeing some of that. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Nothing to add, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate Mr. Perez-Verdia's comments and gratitude towards the community, and I just wanted to mention too that in the past week I've had some really productive phone calls with constituents whose views may be a little bit different from mine, but I very much appreciate the dialogue, and you know, when I have these conversations, it completely affirms to me that, you know, this is a tough time and many of us are tired, but this is a community of good, kind people, and we will get through this. So I thank those, you know, who take the time to create that respectful dialogue. And on a different note, I just want to point out that there are a lot of things going on in April, and it's National Humor Month, but I'm not going to tell any jokes. Thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And excuse me. You know, we learned that a year or so ago that it was important that we washed our hands, hot water, sing happy birthday to you 2 times through, or take me out to the ball game all the way through. And that was new to many people, but I was told that by one of my first cousins who happened to be a medical doctor 15 or 20 years ago. So, and I actually believe, and I thought as soon as the gentleman was testifying about, or the person was testifying last night about the reduction in the flu this year, that was the first thing that came to my mind, is we didn't really have flu this year because we kept our distances and we washed our hands, and most of us were wearing masks whenever we could. And so we have to keep that in mind when it comes to the flu season next year. And if the COVID has passed on, we still should wash our hands and maintain separation distances, especially if you see someone that is exhibiting symptoms of having a cold or the flu. So, and just one more item talking about vaccinations. You know, there's been some criticism of the vaccine that there wasn't enough research done on it, and so we're not sure if there might be side effects going on further on down the road that we're not aware of. Well, they had a problem with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and so they shut it down and quit using it. They had administered 6 million doses of it, and 6 people had major problems. So 1 out of 1 million people had a problem, and they shut it down and quit allowing people to administer it. That's how serious they are taking these vaccines. So people who think that they just approve these and are allowing them to be used willy-nilly with no science, no follow-up, are incorrect. I trust the vaccines. We have had no long-term, short-term, or very few even immediate problems with the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine. And a couple 100 million doses of those have been administered. So I encourage everyone to go and get vaccinated. And there's so much vaccine available here in Anchorage that most places you can walk in without an appointment at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Allard.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank the community for coming out last night. There were a lot of new faces and testimonies that I had never seen those persons before, so I think that was great community involvement. I also wanted to make sure that the community stays involved. And I also wanted to let folks know that I'm not anti-mask. And if you want to wear a mask, I think that's a great thing. And I think if you want to be vaccinated, that's a great thing. If you don't want to be vaccinated, that's up to you. My husband was vaccinated. It was his choice to do so, or the federal government wasn't going to let him buzz around and go TDY to other parts of the country. But I'd also like to say it's not the government's duty to infringe on the rights of individuals who choose not to mask or individuals who choose not to take the vaccine. And just everybody get out and vote. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close out the evening. I was planning on making comments on another topic tonight, but something happened yesterday during the public hearing of the emergency declaration that has forced me to respond. I made a short response during deliberation, but this particular comment regarding the Texas border from the member from Chugiak Eagle River is deserving of further critique. Since yesterday, many constituents have reached out to me, both thanking me for speaking out and imploring that more needs to be said. Now, I am typically not one to make scathing critiques of other members' comments, but I am making notable exception tonight because at some point, enough has to be enough. I'm going to steal a quote from a film I rewatched recently, Lincoln. Some may have noticed I made an oblique reference to this film yesterday. The following quote is made in the film by Thaddeus Stevens, and it goes, quote, "Some of us breathe oxygen, and we find the mephitic fumes of his oratory a lethal challenge to our pulmonary capabilities," end quote. What a fitting quote for what was stated yesterday by one of my colleagues. The constituents who have reached out to me are angry that such comments are even allowed in these chambers. I continue to defend the rights of the member to speak, of any member, no matter how ignorant, misinformed, hurtful, or to quote one of my constituents, xenophobic. And I also defend our right, ability, and at times like this, responsibility to speak out against these types of comments. Since we have started to define terms for some reason, I will go ahead and define the last one on the list. Quote, dislike of or prejudice against people from other countries, end quote. Whether meaning to or not, and I cannot speak to intent, But the comments made by the member from Chugiak Eagle River were dripping with xenophobia and served
Chair, I'd like to
no
give a point of
purpose.
order, please.
Go ahead.
Are you accusing a Chugiak Eagle River member of something that you would just like to flat out say instead of flowering it?
I'm going to finish my comments.
So what are you actually accusing me of? I'm just going to say it right here in the public.
Yeah, so I'm going to finish my comments. My words speak for themselves. And served no purpose but to further create a divide in our community. But moving beyond the political theatrics employed by my colleague, which, frankly, don't have a place in Anchorage, let's talk about the facts, with a couple of opinions thrown into the mix. Fact: the Department of Homeland Security has approved full funding of testing, isolation, and quarantine of migrants. Fact: Governor Abbott of Texas had refused to accept these funds to date. Fact: Governor Abbott has stated that he has no clear data on how many COVID-19 positive asylum seekers are released into the community. Opinion: so instead of taking responsibility, Governor Abbott is scapegoating by demonizing asylum seekers at the border. Fact: the infection rates for all arriving immigrants are lower than for Texas as a whole. Opinion: could that possibly be due to Governor Abbott rescinding the mask mandate and other public health protections? I would say yes. Others may have a different opinion. I implore that the member from Chugiak Eagle River refrain from making misinformed comments that stoke fear, division, and hatred in our community. It is not representative of who we are as a community, and frankly, reflects poorly on us as a body. Enough is enough. Thank you. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
The next time you turn off my mic, we're going to have an issue, and don't think I won't take you to court over it.
We're adjourned.
The member failed to exercise her right to appeal the ruling of the chair. The member was the one who failed to act properly.